So I'd like to talk to you, Mayor Hinnant, about where you were in the 2003 timeframe and how long you've been involved in Kannapolis. And tell us a little bit about what you knew, what you saw in 2003 when the Pillowtex layoffs took place.
Well, I had just been recently elected in 2001, so I was sort of a newbie on the council. In 2003, we had heard rumors that things were not going quite as well as they had hoped. They had not come out of bankruptcy as well as they had hoped that they had come out. And as a result of that, we sort of knew something was on. And then on July 30th, when they announced their shutdown, everybody was in shock. No matter how well you knew it, it's sort of like a passing of a loved one. Even though you know that person is going to pass, it's still shock when it occurs. And that was the opportunity, or that was the results of what happened here. On the day that it was announced, when people were walking out the door, people were crying and falling and collapsing on the sidewalk and sitting and praying and screaming and all of the other things that go along with that, because it was such a huge shock. I can remember distinctly many council meetings that we would have where people would come and speak at the meeting, and you would think these great big robust guys, it couldn't possibly be like this, but they would be standing at the podium speaking and tears would be dripping off their chin because they had no clue as to where they were going to be in the future, because many of them had left school the moment they turned 16. They got a job the next day at the mill. They didn't finish their education. They didn't have a huge amount of education skills. And as a result, they were just lost. They had no idea what the next step was going to be. One of the great things that happened during that period of time is a lady who came, who worked at the mill, who had never gotten an education. She was going to go back to get her GED, but she also was coming to the community college to get some new skills that she needed. And she was convinced to get skills with computer training. And that was early on, so those were not necessarily something that people were really familiar with. So she was convinced to do that. And 2 years later, when she finished her classes, she got a job working in a doctor's office, and she was doing the computer work for a doctor in a doctor's office. She was back, tears, the same tears, dripping off her chin again, but these were tears of joy instead of tears of sadness and tears of anxiety.
So let's pause there. Let's bring Jeanie in.
Okay.
And then we'll catch up and go to the future together. All right.
Okay.
Jeanie Moore, the college's Vice President of Corporate and Continuing Education until she retired, but who carried, I think, the load and the leadership of the Pillowtex effort that the college put together.
We were on the precipice of record enrollment at the college. The college was enjoying great reputation in the community. People knew who we were. Our programs were desirable. So we were anticipating a very large fall enrollment in 2003. In April of 2003, the Vice President of Academic Programs and I went to Raleigh and met with a group from Department of Labor, State Department of Labor, State Department of Commerce, the governor's office, legislators, other community college presidents in the region, and folks from Employment Security Commission, which is not called that now, but those folks were there. And there was a presentation, and they said, you know, we are anticipating that Pillowtex is going to close its doors in July. This is confidential, it hasn't been shared, but we wanted to give you folks advance notice because we anticipate that many of these folks will need training and education and skill development, and we are relying on our community colleges to do that. And so there was a lot of discussion about that, and that there would be money that would be available for the college to ramp up, and there would also be money to help the folks for, they anticipated 2 to 3 years that they would be able to draw extended unemployment benefits, have insurance coverage, that kind of thing, if they opted to go through training. So when I had our information sessions at the old mill, they put us in an old abandoned production mill. Equipment was gone, but the floors were open. We brought chairs in, and they would file the folks in alphabetically. It didn't matter whether you'd been a floor sweeper or whether you'd been a vice president. You were in that group, and everybody looked the same. They were shell-shocked from A to Z. People were just really stunned. And these folks, it was especially heart-wrenching for me and others who grew up in this community, because some of these folks were folks that we had gone to school with. They'd been our neighbors, they'd been our friends, they had maybe relatives. And then we also had done a lot of work with the mill in terms of supervisory skills training, fire training for their emergency teams. And so we knew them from all walks of life. And so it was really a passion for us to try to get these people back whole, to get them to where they could be productive.
Yeah.
But we had to start from really the lowest levels of instruction, because we had a number of folks who could not read. They weren't literate. They knew enough to do their job, but they didn't have good reading, writing skills. So our adult basic education programs became very important, our high school completion, GED programs, and our English as a second language. So those were components that we had really not thought very much about when they first told us about this project. So that was we had capacity there. We knew how to do those and find remote locations that were convenient for folks, and that was helpful. And then we also looked at our short-term training programs in terms of nurse aid and fire and EMS and those kinds of things, where people could come in and get a skill set and maybe find a job.
Okay, so we have some heroics going on with all this cooperation
Oh, yeah.
and communication and money and effort. But then the long-term part of where we are now in Kannapolis is beginning. Mayor Hinnant, can you tell us a little bit about how the NCRC started and what difference that future made in the future of everyone in the community?
Sure. I think you should know that City Council immediately began to think about what they could do with the mill. I mean, it was vacated and they were taking equipment out of it, so it was essentially a shell before it was all done. About the time we started to think about demolishing the mill, David Murdoch showed up. And David Murdoch had the vision that he was going to buy the mill out of bankruptcy, and that he was going to demolish the mill, and that he was going to start something new. Well, we had people on our council, we had people in the community who were absolutely opposed to that. They hoped that the mill would come back again. They hoped that the textile industry would reemerge. And even after they were told it wasn't going to happen, they still hoped for it to happen. So when we got ready to take Mr. Murdoch up on his offer to demolish the mill, that he was going to buy it out of bankruptcy and demolish the mill and take this land and make it into something else. He had shared with us his vision to make this North Carolina Research Campus. I'm not even certain it had that name at that moment in time. And the day that we decided that we were going to do that, they got most of the mill down and left the smokestacks. And the smokestacks were one of the last things that had to be removed from the demolition. I remember distinctly, as we all gathered around to demolish the smokestacks, there were people who worked at the mill standing on the sidewalk, tears running off their chin, because they were so sad that the last beacon of their history was about to be demolished. So there was this huge effort of, we wish it could go back like it was. And when we finally convinced them that it never was going to go back, they reluctantly accepted Mr. Murdoch to do this research campus. So he came in, bought the mill, demolished or bought the mill out of the bankruptcy, demolished the mill, started fresh, and started building what he sold to the university, sold to the legislature, that he wanted to build this North Carolina Research Campus. So he had this vision that he was going to convince all the colleges to work together, to collaborate. Never been done before. That was quite a chore in its own right. Mm-hmm. And to get the community college here on campus, and to have a facility that could perform tests for all of those campuses, so they didn't have to bring duplicate kinds of equipment to it. So the core lab building was a vision So all of those started in 2006. Late in 2015, we tried to get people to come and locate on the campus, and we were not being very successful. And we asked why, because with all this wonderful research, we thought it would just be easy to get additional companies to come. And they said, the difficult part of that is the town is gone and that nobody is there. We had 6 merchants that were left downtown from what was 50 plus merchants when the mill was active and everything. We decided at that point in time there was no choice, that the city had to do something. So we went to Mr. Murdoch and said, would you please fix all of this and help us invest in downtown so that all these boarded up stores and everything could open up and be active again? He said very clearly, no, I don't have any money left over for downtown because all my money is invested in the research campus. Even my estate is invested in the research campus. And he said, I said to him, well, why don't you just sell it to us and let us do something, let the city do something about it? And he said, it's not for sale. And I said, well, wait a minute, you just said that you were having difficulty recruiting researchers here too. And as a result, if you're having problems and we're having problems, let's fix the problem. You sell it to us. And as a result, we wound up making them an offer and buying the downtown and have renovated the downtown. And it's now quite it is quite an attraction to bring people into our downtown that then helps what's going on in the research campus and helps bring people to that.
That's right. So let's catch up on the college side. We're sitting in a college building at this point. It's unusual for a community college to be included in a research campus kind of a design. Maybe you can tell the stories of how that actually came to pass.
Okay, I'll try. Well, there was still that nagging question, what jobs are you going to train people to do, particularly the people who had been so severely impacted. There was a ripple effect. Not only did the people from the mill lose their jobs, but a lot of small businesses closed, retail, the service sector, and so the dry cleaners, furniture stores, restaurants. There were so many other things that were impacted other than just the folks that worked for the mills. So as this vision about the research campus unfolded, there were so many naysayers. You're building these buildings, you're going to have all these scientists in there, and the common people aren't going to have a place there. But as the plans for the buildings evolved, we were sitting around the table, and all of a sudden it was just like, oh, yes, we will be there, because somebody has to maintain those buildings. Somebody has to wire those buildings. Somebody has to put HVAC systems in that building. So it really became, let's look beyond the scientific part of it and talk about the infrastructure and support kinds of things. And so we could wrap our heads around that. And then the college made several decisions strategically. A lot of our trade and skill programs were literally dying on the vine, because people weren't looking for those jobs. Everybody thought they had to go to college and get a 4-year degree to have a successful livelihood. So we, when these folks came out of the mill, some of them had definite skill sets in a mechanical direction. So how can we channel these folks into those niche markets where, those skill sets are really highly desirable and needed? So it really revived our electrical installation and maintenance programs, our welding program, our automotive program. We had pretty much done away with our construction program, but we had, Salisbury High School still had a construction lab and construction going on there. And so we actually did classes there in the evening for adult students who wanted to enter that arena. Robinson High School in Cabarrus County had a pretty sophisticated, for high school, HVAC lab. So we moved our HVAC program there because the one at our North Campus in Salisbury was shutting down. So we revived that, and the high school used it during the day for their students, and then at night we had adult students there. And strategically, we started moving some programs into Cabarrus County that we didn't have an audience for in our North Campus.
So we've got just a few more minutes to talk about what the future holds. I think you got us started in that direction. You bought the town by then, and you've got a lot of things happening. The ballpark, you probably should talk just a little bit about that, and then what you hope for the future. And I'll do the same with you, Jeanie.
Well, when we purchased the downtown, we were sort of like the dog that chases the bus. We didn't know what to do with it. And so we went to the School of Government. We had heard that there was an organization that was associated with the School of Government in Chapel Hill, and that school had a group of people that was called Diversified Financial Initiatives, and that they helped communities around the state figure out how they could be successful. We talked to them, employed them, and asked them to help us put a master plan together for what the downtown could be. They told us, in order for this plan to work, you need an anchor. And that anchor should be a thing that brings a lot of people to the downtown. They gave us a list of different kinds of anchors, and we selected a baseball stadium. That now has become the anchor. At the time that we said that, we said, well, but minor league baseball only operates about 10 weeks a year. So what are we going to do with this thing for the rest of the time? So we said, why don't we just make it into a year-round park so that people can play, the kids can play, you can come out, you can sit down in the bleachers and enjoy a sandwich, the concession stands can be open, you can get a barbecue sandwich or something along the way. And so we said, let's make it into a park, so that our entire downtown became a park. And that has brought many, many people. If you are there now, any day of the week, it's amazing how many people are out walking, discovering a healthy life, which is our motto for our community, and walking their dogs, their pets, and having a great time. And so it has been the catalyst in the revitalization of downtown that has really brought it all together.
And of course, the city and the college have had a lot of commonality there and partnership. But I think if we can talk a little bit about the results of those folks who went through the early trainings, and some of them I know we employed at the college until they retired, but I think they've gone off to do so many other things and fill in so many other niches. Do you have any general idea of how successful the efforts of the community college were for those folks?
Well, it's a lot of it is anecdotal, because one of the things, the revelations for us was that while we worked together as partners with employment security and workforce boards and the state, our systems didn't talk to each other. But anecdotally, we know some folks went to the school systems and worked in as facility managers and maintenance folks. A lot of people went to work in doctors' offices, as Mayor Hinnant described, in the hospitals, particularly in our allied health programs and nurse aid and that kind of thing. We had a number of folks who have been entrepreneurial and who've opened some of those small shops that Mayor Hinnant described for downtown, coffee shops, restaurants, bookstores, that kind of thing. So those were good. And a number of them, again, continued to work at the college for a long time in other parts. And some went on to universities and finished, lifelong dreams of getting a 4-year degree. So we know there was a lot of success, but we can't really quantify so much of it. We had a career center in downtown that we set up, and that was a lesson learned for the college, that if we had a place where people could come and really analyze career choices and get help in how to interview, how to write a resume, how to job search, how to use a computer, that those were really important skills. We had folks that went into biotechnology too, and some who work on the campuses who, got their degrees and are working for Appalachian, for example, in their fitness lab and in some of the other areas. So we broadened the horizon for a lot of folks. And I think what's so amazing is that Kannapolis is a destination. And when we first learned about the mill closing, I think all of us had that vision of vacant old buildings crumbling and streets in disrepair. And if you look at Kannapolis now, it's hard to imagine that it was the same place.
People are amazed and delighted at the progress that's been made here, especially after a great history of cannon mills, and then, going through the recessions and things like that, the change of the textile industry in particular.
Let me add one
Sure.
thing to it that makes it even further in the future and how it will impact what Rowan-Cabarrus will impact the future. I spend a lot of my time recruiting for businesses to come into our town, and we have been extremely successful. And one of the reasons we've been extremely successful is that the very first question when I'm recruiting a business, they ask me is, do you have workers that can work and perform the jobs in my building that I need? My answer is always to them the very same answer. If we don't have the people, our first answer is, yes, we have people who are ready to go to work in your business. But if we don't have them, Rowan-Cabarrus Community College will train them. By the time you get your building built, we will have the workforce ready for you. It is always the first question. Without the answer, without the way to say that Rowan-Cabarrus will do this for you, we would not have the successes.
Well, we take that very seriously, and we want to make sure that people who live here are accessing those opportunities, and I think that's what we've seen through all the work that was done through the Pillowtex issue. So we have a track record we can run on, and a lot of experience and support and partners from all of us. So thank you both for being with us. We can keep talking about this for a long time. There's some resources on the website that will give you more information about any parts of this that you want to know. It was very well documented, and it's such a big part of our history that we want to make sure that we all know what it is and know that we've recovered from it. So resilience is our name, and so thank you for sharing your stories today.
Thank you.